Hello, welcome to Third Thursday, and I'm glad that so many people made it out to this event when it is literally hotter than the sun. So I appreciate that. Yes, I do think I make everything look hotter just because I am sweating. My forearms are sweating, but I'm having a great time. It's great to see everybody. Thank you. And I just wanted to remind everybody that these events are paid for by you, except for this month. We do have an anonymous donor who paid, and so I ordered extra food because of that. So thank you to the anonymous donor. Whoever she or he or it is, thank you very much. All right, so today the way these work is we do 20-minute talks followed by Q&A. So we do have a Q&A. Today I'm very excited to get to introduce my new friend, Ryan Puzycki. And Ryan has the future mayor of Austin, said by everybody who apparently does not live in Austin. Ryan has really inspired me to think more about local politics. And this is something I've never thought about as an objectivist studying objectivism for years. I was in my head and thinking big and let's change the whole world. But Ryan's really thought about, for me in little ways, and he even got me to actually sign up for something and actually send something to my local legislator or whoever they're called, I don't know. So that's why I rely on Ryan for. So thank you so much. So today he's going to talk to you guys about the fight for property rights in Austin. So thank you, everybody. Welcome, Ryan Puzycki.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks Kirk for organizing. I know it's a hot night, but this is a hot topic, so hope we can have some fun with it. So I'm Ryan Puzycki. So I've gotten involved a little bit in local politics and particularly with housing policy since I moved here last year. So tonight, my topic is called the fight for property rights in Austin. Particularly as it relates to housing policy. But really there's a deeper theme that I want to talk about, which is about the need for civic engagement and the possibility of change at the local level. So I hope to demonstrate to you that progress is in fact possible, at least in this more limited sphere, and to try to get you to believe that it's important that we all take a greater interest in local politics and our community. So why should you care about any of this stuff? Well, I think we all moved to Austin if we didn't grow up here because we were attracted to certain qualities about the city. Maybe it was the cheap housing, maybe it was the lack of an income tax. I would say the weather, but as it is. But certainly, for the community that we've been building here just in this room, outdoor room. But you've probably noticed that Austin isn't Galt's Gulch. At least I don't remember Galt's Gulch having a homelessness problem, but here we are. But the point why I say that is because the objectivist community is always going to be a small part of the population of the city of 1 million people, which means that we've got to coexist with almost 1 million people who don't really see eye to eye with us on other issues, or any issue really. So to me that means that the qualities that make Austin attractive to us can't be taken for granted. At the same time, I don't think we should take for granted that we can't impact our quality of life here. So, I think if we want to see Austin remain a great place to live, or perhaps even a better place to live, we can't sit on the sidelines. We have to get involved in this community in local issues that matter to us individually. So we have to engage civically, is my thinking here. Politics, especially local politics, is not, in my view, pointless. Our local and state governments have so much influence over our daily experience here. What happens in Washington is largely garbage, and it's far away. But what happens here does actually affect your life. Everything from policing to emergency services to homelessness to property taxes to education to transit options to the way that we can build on our land here. These are all local issues. In my view, there's no reason why we should cede any of this stuff to partisans on the left or right, to bureaucrats or to incompetent politicians. In fact, my experience doing limited work just on housing policy over the past year has convinced me that, progress is actually possible, that people, good people, working together can actually make a difference on these issues. So that brings me to the fight for property rights in Austin. So just to be clear, what we're talking about in this context is real property, land and buildings, not other things you might own. So in Austin, what, where, when, and how you can build is governed by the city's land use code. It's pretty typical of cities everywhere to restrict the rights of property owners in some way. In Austin's case, this goes back to a 1928 master plan that has its roots in segregation. So if you want to talk about that in the Q&A, we can, but we won't get into that so much right now. But I'd say what's atypical about Austin right now is that there is a large number of people, a growing body of people who are realizing that our current land use code is actually a problem. So, how does land use create a problem? What is it? So they basically affect nearly every aspect of the built environment in Austin. Just some examples. So we have exclusionary zoning. This limits, what you can build on land, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, other uses, whether or not you can mix uses, whether or not they can be next to each other. We have things here called compatibility restrictions, which place limits on the height and shape size of buildings within a 540-foot radius of any single-family home in the city. So this explains why when you're driving down major corridors, everything is like a short one-story building. Odds are that there's a house, within a few hundred feet of that building. We also have parking requirements, which dictate how many parking spaces a developer has to provide for any building, regardless of what the market might demand. And there's many more restrictions. We have minimum lot size requirements, drainage rules, setback requirements, all sorts of things. Meanwhile, we have a system that gives protest rights to neighbors of any property that is seeking a zoning change to maybe build something different than what's just allowed by right. Protest rights basically drag out the time it takes to complete projects all over the city, and sometimes it kills them outright. And on top of that, you then have the city approvals. So certain projects require the separate approval of 11 city departments, all of which are currently understaffed. So if you can even get somebody on the phone, imagine trying to do that 11 times. I mean, this adds months, sometimes years to projects, all of which adds up to time, expense, and complexity. Not great. Basically, all of it comes together to not only make it very expensive and complex to build, but it just sometimes prevents things from being built at all. I don't know if you've driven around and seen empty lots or underdeveloped lots and wondered, why the hell is that? Well, land use regulations are often the reason why. So these violations of property rights have real world consequences in our daily lives. What you see in Austin in terms of the pattern of growth is it's kind of low density, it's car-centric. We have a pattern of suburban sprawl where there's lots of strip malls, lots of parking lots, lots of big roads. We only really have a few denser walkable neighborhoods outside of downtown. But I think the more important thing is that our land use regulations have prevented the market from providing enough housing basically to meet all of the demand here. And that has led to people like all of us who have moved to Austin, bidding basically on the few apartments available for rent or for sale. And that's led to skyrocketing rents and home prices. I'm sure everybody's seen that. And a further consequence of that is that so many people have been priced out of the desirable parts of town or even the city entirely. We have friends all over the sort of greater Austin area, but we don't live close to each other. I mean, it's pretty a regular occurrence for us to drive 45 minutes to an hour just to see our friends who live in Austin, Oh, sorry. But it has public safety concerns. Our 911 call center and our police department are currently severely understaffed because they cannot recruit employees who can afford to live in the city. It has economic consequences. Employers are canceling their plans to move to Austin or to expand in Austin because their employees can't afford to buy homes here or pay rents here. All of this threatens Austin's economic growth, our quality of life, our public safety, and the overall desirability of the city for all of us that we chose to come to. And of course, this all stems from a land use system that is inherently based on violations of private property rights. So it's like whether subjecting property to arbitrary rules or capricious bureaucrats, grandstanding politicians, or nosy neighbors, oftentimes it is the property owner who has the least control over what he can do with his property. But not everything's bad. There's some good news. This is changing here in Austin. There is a fight for property rights underway right here, right now, particularly with respect to pro-housing reform. This fight is usually characterized as a debate between NIMBYs and YIMBYs. If you're not familiar with the term, NIMBY is not in my backyard, YIMBY is yes in my backyard. Basically, NIMBYs are sort of anti-development, YIMBYs are pro-development, but it's a little more complicated than that. There are people in both of these camps who span the entire breadth of the political spectrum on both sides. So NIMBYs, they come from a variety of backgrounds. You might have environmentalists who see any development as bad, suburbanists who perceive threats to their quality of life from maybe a public bus going by. You have rich people who love the poor as long as the poor live far away. You have poor people who fear gentrification and displacement. You have conservatives who fear change and the people they think change looks like. You have old school socialists who think landlords and developers are inherently evil. And then you just have a lot of people who simply favor restricting the supply of housing because it juices their property values. They confuse the protection of property rights with protectionism for property values. But the YIMBY movement, again, these are the pro-development people, also span a broad political coalition. There are environmentalists who think that sprawl is bad for the environment. There are affordable housing advocates and homelessness activists. You have your conservative Chamber of Commerce types. You've got democratic socialists who see housing affordability as a matter of economic justice. And then you've got progressives who see housing affordability as a matter of racial justice. And then there are those who believe that without property rights, the right to life and liberty are meaningless. Supporters on the YIMBY side generally, but not always, recognize that there are supply-demand economics that apply to housing. If maybe one day they could extrapolate to other areas, that'd be great, but this is still pretty good. And a large component of these people, define themselves as market urbanists. So within Austin, the way that this has played out over the past 40 years or so is that the NIMBYs have had the upper hand. They've basically run neighborhood associations, and they've had a number of groups where they've used public meetings, political pressure, and even lawsuits to prevent development all over the city and to prevent changes to the land use code. As I said, this has been going on for decades. However, in recent years, a pro-housing reform movement has emerged, and it's been gaining steam here in Austin, and it's actually scored some recent wins. This is in part because just the cost of housing here has kind of jazzed up a lot of younger people graduating from UT who looked at rents and looked at home prices and said, F that. But anyway, it's gaining steam, and it's taken many forms. So I kind of stepped into this in the past year or so. So I'll just give you some examples of the types of activism that I and other people have been doing. So this past legislative session, I went up to the State House and lobbied basically for some pro-housing bills that were at the House. I've been, as Kirk was saying, emailing and calling elected officials and roping in other people to do that as well. But I've also been engaging with them in person and online. I've written some articles and letters to the editor. And I've basically been attending meetups and conferences and trying to connect with people who are passionate about these issues as well. So we found a relatively large number of people, and we've engaged ourselves and we've organized to basically amplify our message on the efficacy of our efforts at the state level and at the city level. At the city level, these efforts have paid off. In the last November election, the result of that is that we now have one of the most pro-housing city councils in Austin's history, if not the most. And they have been making good progress on reform. They've introduced resolutions that would increase density and height allowances along transit corridors, that would abolish those parking mandates that I was talking about, which is huge. They want to reduce compatibility height restrictions, which are the magic force field around single-family homes that suppress development all over town. They're working on reducing permitting and approval processes for certain larger residential projects, which would speed up the way that we get new housing. And they're talking now about reducing minimum lot sizes and allowing by right up to 3 dwellings on any single family lot, which these would be important. And at the state level, there were a number of groups that introduced pro-housing legislation just during this past Texas legislative session. One bill passed, but even that was kind of a victory since this was the first really concerted YIMBY effort at the state level. And it's important because the framing, especially at the state level, was explicitly pro-property rights, and people responded to that. And a number of bills got very far in the process with bipartisan support, but were killed for various shenanigans that we can talk about some other time maybe. But anyway, this in itself is progress. the climate, at least at the State House, has shifted on these issues, and it has certainly shifted at City Hall. And it suggests, at least at the state level, that we can do better in the next legislative session in 2025. But we're certainly making progress now. That said, these successes don't add up to a revolution. There are still problems, and a lot of what's happening at the city level still have to go through the grinder of the city bureaucracy. So, it will take time to really see the benefits of these things. But taken together, these are major reforms that have all been realized in just the past 6 months, but after years of effort. And it's only happened because a relatively small group of people showed up at City Hall, at the State House, at debates, at hearings, at rallies, and basically advocated for their ideas over and over and over again in the face of well-funded NIMBY opponents, and they're making a difference. And, let's not forget the upshot here is that a lot more housing is going to be built throughout Austin in the coming years. That should bring down average property prices. That should restore Austin's affordability somewhat. And it, more broadly, should keep this place the economic engine that it really should and ought to be. Again, this is all by making incremental progress in restoring property rights to property owners. So my takeaways from participating in and observing all of this has been that, political progress is possible, but it is often slow, and it is person by person. It is a process of persuading individuals one by one. It happens piecemeal, but over time it does add up. So I think the way to think about this is that progress is not about starting a revolution overnight. It is about shifting the Overton window of what is possible towards your viewpoint over time. And I think another big takeaway from this is that you just can't skip the hard part of engaging with people in real life. You have to talk to people. You have to get out there. Sending an anonymous tweet doesn't count. But I've also learned that there are fellow travelers on this journey, people who are very passionate like me about this issue, but who may not agree with me on really anything else. And I've made friends with a lot of these people. And just to the kind of original question, that is important to me because that extends my network of who I know in Austin and makes me feel more tied to this place that we've decided to call home. So continuing with that, why should you care? Well, I think that Austin should be more than just a refuge from blue state dysfunction. It should be a place where we can all live full and meaningful lives, right? At the end of Atlas Shrugged, John Galt tells Dagny, we are going back to the world. We're not staying in this Shangri-La Valley. So my hope for and challenge to you is to work for a world where you don't feel the need to leave the world in the first place. I want us to work to find ways to make this place feel like an enduring home, not a sanctuary from the real world. And to me, that means engaging with the broader community around us and trying to be a force for good here on the issues that matter to me individually, but may be different for you. Your issues don't have to be the same as mine. But whatever you care about, I encourage you to get informed, to get involved, get offline, and out into the real world where your fellow citizens are living and waiting to meet you. Find something you value, that you care about in this community, wherever you live. And I think odds are you'll find people who, agree with you, who care about it too. And if you want, maybe you can build a coalition around that, like-minded people who agree on this, but maybe not a bunch of other stuff. And together you can try to make progress in some of the ways that, I've described. And I think that adds up over time to making Austin a better place for all of us to live. To those who focus a lot on national politics, I'd say turn off the TV. But, but more importantly, don't despair. You don't have to stand by and let things happen to you. You don't have to be a victim of circumstance. You don't have to sacrifice your sense of agency and your values for any of that. And I think the antidote to that is to live locally, to understand that the most important fight is right here, right now, in your own backyard. So I'll leave you with this. Rand said that those who fight for the future live in it today. So that's a corollary. I'd say that those who fight for the future of Austin live here in it more fully and more meaningfully as well. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we have a microphone for questions. Ben's got our first question.
Questions?
Great talk. Thanks. Can't wait to vote for you.
The first step in voting for me is to register to vote.
I did it. 2 questions, unrelated.
Yeah.
One is, could you tell us more about how the current land use code is rooted in the history of segregation? And 2, so this is a great example of how somebody can make progress on property rights activism. What are some other issues that you think maybe objectivists might be interested in getting involved in?
Okay. Great questions. So for the first, after the Civil War and during the kind of like Great Migration era, Austin was a city. It didn't have really a slave-holding past in the way that a lot of other places in Texas did. It became a beacon for freed slaves, basically. And so they started to move to Austin in droves in the early 1900s, and they settled all over the city. White people in the city didn't like that because that meant now there were black people living next to them. So in the 1920s, they came up with something called, the master plan, which, anytime you use that word, you can imagine where it's going. And they basically created a plan that created a Negro district on the east side. We actually live in said district now. And the way that they weren't allowed to legally force anybody into that district. So what they did was say that, well, we don't really want to have to go through the problem of, it'd be really inconvenient for Austin if we had to pay for a white pool and a black pool, or for white street cleaners and black street cleaners. So wouldn't it just be more convenient for everybody if we just had everybody self-segregate into parts of the city where everybody was the same? And also, by the way, that's the only place you're going to get your black school and your black pool. So that was the 1928 plan, and it sort of created a pattern of growth and development in the city that has kind of colored a lot of the modern day politics. If you're familiar with Austin politics, the east side is generally where a large population of black and Latino people live, and there's like a gentleman's agreement that, or there used to be a gentleman's agreement that there had to be one black representative on council and one Mexican on council to kind of reflect that history. Not great stuff. But here we are. Anyway, so more modern land use emerged out of that in the 1930s. And basically, one way to prevent undesirables from moving into neighborhoods was to do such things as require very large lot sizes. And so much of central Austin is zoned suburban, basically, for suburban single-family homes, which were economically out of reach of many minorities at that time. And so that kind of perpetuated this long-term process of segregation, but also economic segregation that we live with today. So really, the modern thing that we're trying to dismantle is a direct legacy of that era, in my view. So is that enough? Sobering. To your second question, other issues that I think objectivists could weigh in on. Well, public safety is a big one, I think. There are the kind of like right-wing contingent of people here advocating for public safety, I think, have done a lot to discredit themselves with the center-left population, which is the majority of voters. And so I think there's an angle there for, for doing some work maybe on, being pro-police but also pro-police reform. Homelessness is another one. A few of us were talking about that earlier. I think that issue needs a lot of attention. Property taxes, maybe, that sort of thing. The school district is like a whole other animal that kind of scares me. But those are a few ideas. Thank you.
Nice talk. Enjoyed
Thanks.
it. So this might be a little rambling, but I've owned property in different states, and it feels like Texas is quite different from Illinois, New York, California. It feels like there's more regulation around involving individuals in the legal ramifications of owning property here. So, for instance, you get to protest your property tax value. I've never done that before in any other state. We received something in the mail about a condo that was going to be built within 1,000 feet of our property or something like that. And apparently there was some right to protest that as well. It feels like maybe that's an opening for the individual in some way. I don't know. Do you feel like it's something better about Texas or not? Or is it an Austin thing?
Well, on the property tax side, we protested, but it still ended up being a lot higher than we were hoping for. So, as for the right to petition against other properties, no, I mean, I come down, I think, pretty hard on this, that if it's not your property, it's not really your business unless that property is going to have some kind of, externality that directly affects you. But if we're talking about a shadow, in my view, doesn't count. I lived in New York for 13 years, and it's just part and parcel, literally, of living in a dense place. My view is that mostly the petition rights have contributed to the mess we're in. People now expect to be able to put the kibosh on any new development. Like, they think it's their right to control. I would also say here, like, even though I use the YIMBY-NIMBY framing, I kind of don't like it, because YIMBY also bakes in the same kind of package deal that NIMBY does, that we're talking about my backyard. Well, it's not actually your backyard we're talking about. We're usually talking about somebody else's backyard. And there was a line I cut that was, in order to say yes in my backyard, you must first know how to say the my. And, well, most of the time we're not talking about my backyard or your backyard. We're talking about their backyard, and really it's not, shouldn't be our business. So, there's a state law that allows for that. So there's, room there. But, there's room for local improvement as well. So thanks for the question. Yes. Hi.
Yeah, I guess it's more like not in our backyard. That's kind of the mentality, because they think they control everything, right?
Yeah. We're talking about a metaphorical backyard
yeah.
instead of like an actual piece of property.
Right. So my question is, like, your approach to this is kind of like winning hearts and minds, and you're using sort of the structure, the infrastructure that is available to you to do that. So, like, you're going through, like, you're advocating, you're lobbying, you're getting people on the ground. Do you have any thoughts about, like, more radical approaches to solving this? Like, you have, like, the metaphorical, entrepreneur who wants to totally change this industry, and they push through that red tape through, like, much more severe means, like how Uber kind of just introduced taxis, or their own sort of ride-sharing system, and they just said, we're going to handle the legal ramifications as they happen.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that in at least the housing policy world that there's been any good examples of that. So
I guess Airbnb, to some extent.
Sort of, but that's now become, I don't know if you saw today, Dallas City Council just banned short-term rentals in the city there in response to a proliferation. And so that's the backlash that you get when, so that's probably not the outcome Airbnb was hoping for.
Yeah.
My view, the way I look at this is that, there is a difference between the metaphysical and the man-made, but, men are real too. And they are in positions of power, and, you have to kind of navigate that. You basically have to navigate the power structure. My interest in all of this stuff really got piqued by reading Robert Caro's The Power Broker last year. It kind of was eye-opening for me in understanding how power actually works behind the scenes. Oh, you think you go to the ballot box and you cast your vote, and then your elected official goes and does the thing that you voted for them for. And it doesn't happen like that at all. There's all sorts of power centers outside of just the elected officials. The city bureaucracy in Austin is a huge power center here. They can control the pace or whether or not anything will actually happen. So, like, understanding that, like, you can come in guns blazing and, like, run a campaign against, somebody you don't like, but it may not matter at the end of the day if the city bureaucracy doesn't want to do anything with you. And then there's, like, soft power too, like nonprofits and, things like that. So my approach to this has been to take a more, like, expansive view and, like, try to understand the lay of the land and why certain people are successful at making things happen, rather than just trying to blast through it. Why I mentioned that, we are a small group in a city of nearly 1 million people is because all of those other millions of people, there are leftists who are greater in numbers than us, and better organized, who are out there fighting, the same fights we are, but on the other side. And, they know how to navigate this stuff and how to pull levers and how to get things done. So, anyway, I guess I'm trying to understand the machine and how it works and not try to blow up the machine at this point. But maybe see if we can use the machine towards our ends. So, if you can figure it out, I'll hop on board, but I think it's a big challenge. So, thanks.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
You mentioned offhand in your talk that there had been some positive reaction to talking about things from the standpoint of property rights.
Yep.
And I was just curious as to when you're approaching individuals, the extent to which you introduce principles into the discussion versus focusing mainly on, I don't know, short-term economic advantages or something else along those lines.
Yeah. So at the state level, it was interesting because I talked to something like 60 different offices over the course of my time up there, and I was talking to Democrats and Republicans. And you kind of have to code switch on the issue. So like Republicans were very responsive, or the most responsive to the property rights issue, although some of more of the general messaging was framed that way. But they kind of, they kind of viscerally get my property, That's why I'm standing my ground here, on my ground. Not with that accent, though. And but it's interesting with these things too. Like even you get to the principles, but there's still like an emotional aspect to it too, where like your elderly mother, your recently graduated child, they have nowhere to live, that kind of thing. So like the family angle also plays well with the Texas conservative. So interestingly, on the talking to the Democrats, though, they still kind of get like the market supply side of it, even if you don't talk about the property rights aspect explicitly. But they get that we need to provide supply, more housing at scale in order to provide a larger range of housing at different price points so that, say, teachers, EMTs, police officers, childcare workers can actually afford to live in the same place where they're working. The school district is having the same problem right now as the police department and the EMT services, where they can't get people to work here because nobody can afford to live here. So, yeah, it's you kind of have to know who you're talking to and maybe frame it in the way that will best be received. But they're all still hearing the same arguments too.
Going to steal follow-up.
Yeah.
So when engaging the Democrats, it sounds like you've had some, there's been some positive movement from the standpoint of, at least in the way you framed it, like freeing things up a bit for more development and potentially lowering prices that way. Maybe it's because I'm used to dealing with more far left folks, but my experience has been that the affordable housing and that sort of thing has often been framed from the standpoint of, well, we need to take more money from something and give it to people rather than making it more economical to develop housing in the first place.
Right.
But am I correct in hearing that you've had some success with that?
The terminology here is a little confusing. So there's capital A affordable, capital H housing, which is basically subsidized housing. Who is doing the subsidizing, though, is, it could be the state directly. It could be developers through, market rate apartments that subsidize basically the affordable units in the building. But again, there are programs that dictate what you have to do there. So it's not like they gleefully decided to provide the subsidized housing there. But then there's a separate issue of housing affordability. So that's more of the angle that I'm coming at. Like, I'm not advocating for, like, let's subsidize more housing. I'm advocating for let's build all of the housing that we can in order to bring it down to a level that is affordable to the median household or median, renter. So, yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. No double dipping.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Okay. Oh gosh, I keep taking it. Okay. When you talk about like fellow travelers who kind of agree with you on the main goal that you're trying to achieve, but you know that you don't share the same premises necessarily. So do you ever sort of push back philosophically against even like your allies in this, and like how do you draw the line about like where you need to stand your ground versus what you can sort of let slide philosophically?
Yeah, I mean, there's a, this is a big tent kind of movement. So you do have people in there who want the city to build more, but don't really care about property rights. Like, there are people who think there should be eviction bans or rent control and things like that. Those are the types of things I would push back on. But like adjacent issue or non-adjacent issues, I kind of avoid unless they come up, but generally they don't. But I would say, like, when you have, when you travel with fellows, you you kind of build credibility and like social capital that you can draw on, so that when you get to a point where I'm going to say something that might sound crazy now, they don't look at you like you're a crazy person, even if you disagree. So like, that's kind of what I like about this. One of the things that's been really inspiring about this movement is that there have been all of these people in the same room. We did kind of like a legislative recap when it was all over to like, what did we learn? And there were people all over the political spectrum in there. And we were all like enjoying each other's company. Now, if we turn to like, I don't know, Medicare for all, the tenor of the conversation might be a lot different. But on that topic, it's all brothers in arms kind of thing. So. Thank you.
Just curious if you see in your future running for any office, and if so, what might it be?
Like Gavin Newsom said, I'm not running for president. Just kidding. I don't know. That's a whole different thing to navigate. As I said earlier, I'm still trying to understand the kind of power structure here and how people end up on the ballot in the first place. And, my interest is more in actually just making good things happen. And I don't necessarily need the prestige of some elected position that comes with a lot of other baggage too, probably, to do that. And so on the issues that I care about, if, the stuff I've been doing on housing seems to have been effective, so I'm going to try to do more of that and be like a positive advocate and activist in that realm. And if I can find a way to do that on some of the other issues I mentioned, I'm open to that too. And if that turns into something one day, then I'll consider it, but it's not my primary goal right now. It's to get the work done, not to get the job, I guess. So thanks for the question.
Well, I'm sold.
Great. See you later.
Who else? Is anybody else interested in this? Is this clicking with people? Hopefully. How can we help more? What's the next step?
Yeah, great question. Totally not a setup. So Garrett and Kirk and others have been talking about, if there are people who are interested in maybe taking the next step on local issues, doing like some workshops or talks just to kind of maybe take all of our energy and use it more constructively. Maybe not come in guns blazing on some things, but, try to figure out, okay, if you're interested in, try to figure out pathways to progress, I think, on issues that people care about. I'm not necessarily going to agree or support each one of them, but, I'm happy to talk to anybody who's interested more about that and maybe start getting the ball rolling on that. So.
Cool.
Cool. Anything else?
One more question? Ron, are you done? Okay. I'll take another. Oh, Conrad, last question to Conrad.
Thinking about that, actually, yeah, but not yet. But yeah, I guess anybody who is interested in anything I've talked about, just talk to me afterward. I know I have all of your information already, but if we don't know each other, let's talk. Kirk has all of them, so maybe we'll send out a follow-up after this with ways to get in touch. Kirk, can we do that? No. Okay, great. Yeah, kind of.
That was actually my question.
Oh. Still in thunder here.
But on that note, you have been politically active on specific issues. Do you maybe write like a draft letter that's good for anyone to sign and then send to their constituent politician, that we can maybe sign up for that newsletter, decide if we're willing to put our name to whatever message that you're writing up?
Yeah, so that was a tactic we used with some of the housing stuff, where somebody would just kind of come up with a boilerplate thing, and then you could customize it at will. But that allowed us, and even there's like software you can it just fills in the blanks for you and just mass sends.
Chat GPT, yeah.
Great. What a world. But yeah, that's the type of thing where you can kind of, and Garrett and Kirk and I talked about doing something along those lines, where if we know that there is a group of people who is interested in this stuff, kind of, and when we get to like the next session or maybe the next council issue on this, where we can say, hey, activists activate, and a little message goes out or something, and it says, send this to blah blah blah, or fill out this form, and it just sends it away. But yeah, so I'm interested in stuff and willing to do a lot of that work. But it'd be great to get
Yeah, it
more
sounds
people
like you
on
have
board.
almost 30 people here who are interested in that.
We'll see what actually
Very
happens.
little work and very easy outcome.
Yeah.
Secondly,
Great idea though. Yeah.
do you have any ideas? You don't have to come up with a specific policy about this, but we're talking about zoning laws a little bit. Do you see any concern with, let's say, a residential neighborhood, all single family, or I don't know, some kind of single family home? Then across the street, across many years, some corporation buys up 3, 4, maybe 5 properties, and then develops maybe a factory. Maybe low pollution, but maybe more, let's say, water in the air, water vapor in the air, causing more rain, changing the landscape a little bit. Do you see any concern where there's no bylaw where we blend commercial with residential property rights?
Well, I would say this is more industrial, but yeah, to your point.
I don't have an opinion about that, but I'd love to hear what you think
under the
about that
current
topic.
zoning, there's like, a million different categorizations. There's like heavy industrial and light industrial. So I think what you're talking about, which would be like emissions producing factories, that's more heavy industrial.
It's also an eyesore.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, well, yeah. Yeah, in theory, no, I don't have any problems with that. I will be a politician and kind of divert the question, though, because I don't think that's really ever what we're talking about. Usually what we're talking about is building a large multifamily building next to single family homes. Like, that's where the debate is currently. Most of the industrial properties are well outside the city at this point, or themselves, like the St. Elmo district in South Austin is a former, sort of industrial district that's being converted into like a large multi-use, mixed-use area with like breweries and apartment buildings and stuff, and it seems pretty cool. I haven't been yet. So, the battle we're fighting now is like, people don't want the skyscraper condo building, but that's also not what we're talking about. What we're trying to talk about in single family neighborhoods is what's this thing called like gentle density or missing middle housing, which is allowing, say, like a 4-plex, which is 4 units, or 6-plex maybe if we're lucky, or townhomes on lots that are currently where you can only build, freestanding single-family homes currently. And over time, as those sort of blend into the fabric of the neighborhood, people realize, oh, this isn't threatening, and they just get used to there being more density and more housing where they live, and then all the bigger stuff becomes less threatening over time. So, yeah.
So, just a comment. As a real estate investor for 40 years, I've always contended that all of the zoning can be handled through CC&Rs. So that's the way to handle that kind of thing. Where
what's this?
Oh, I probably should explain that. It's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So when you buy a property, it comes with these covenants that you have to go by. And the people who originally developed the land, and sell it off, put these CC&Rs, like a condo association or a development will have CC&Rs attached to it that say you can do this and you can't do that. You can't put a gas station, but you can put a store. You can't, so they'll have rules. And so that's the people who own and buy the property will have the CC&Rs in place. And that gets the government out of it. And the people who own the properties get to decide what can be there and what not. And you can also change it based on people who are members of the members in that area can get together and say, okay, so we want to change these CC&Rs. Now we can do this, or now we can't, or do those changes. So it's the people who own the property who actually get to decide what they do in that area. So, and then I'm I'm sorry, I hate people who come up and don't have questions, but I have a comment.
Question mark. What do you
just
think
have
about
a comment
that?
on the disparity between the development you talked about in two different areas that I know about, and that so when my daughter went to Auburn down in Alabama, and they had a moratorium on downtown development, and so they removed the development, and 6 months later they had 5-story buildings coming out of the ground. We went back to visit her. And then 6 months after they removed the moratorium, where I lived in California, I don't like to say it out loud, and they had a development, similar development that took 25 years for them to complete the process and get the permits. So that's a disparity you can have between the different areas. And I'm assuming that Austin comes down somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, look at the cost of housing in California versus probably Auburn, and it's, I imagine, a lot more affordable in Alabama.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing is that the codes are a big restriction on.
Yeah, but you see, like, when the market was allowed to respond, it responded to and provided the supply.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I think, you know, to your former point about the like covenants and deed restrictions. So Houston doesn't have zoning, but the way that they've kind of managed things is through these CCRs. So there are like HOAs and deed restrictions. I believe their system requires them to be put up for a vote every 10 years or something like that. So that if the neighborhood decides they want to change an upzone, that then they have a process for allowing that rather than having a deed restriction in perpetuity. That's an interesting idea. I don't have strong feelings about it. I think with the idea, though, like, I'm comfortable with that if everybody opts in at the beginning. And then so if you sell in that neighborhood, you know when you buy the house that there's a deed restriction here that limits what you can do. And as long as you're voluntarily buying the house, that's fine. I have a problem when they're imposed after a neighborhood has been built and it's by, you know, democratic vote, and you have neighbors who don't want it, but who, because of whatever threshold was decided, don't get to decide the outcome. That I'm a little uncomfortable with. Yeah. So it's still like, you know, who is, you know, there are HOAs that are more tyrannical than, you know, governments. So, so it's like, pick your poison. I'd rather not have the poison, though. Yeah, right, exactly. All right, well, thanks so much. I appreciate the questions and your being here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Just one reminder, we do have one more event in June. It's at the Curtin Theater. It's Austin Shakespeare presentation of Comedy of Errors. I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but go to Meetup. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Ryan, for that awesome talk. I appreciate it. All right.